Hey, good evening. So, I wanted to go ahead and do another vector tutorial on how you can start with a sketch and then move to some really clean line formation and kind of show you that on some fan art I made from a Studio Ghibli. If you've seen Nausicaa, obviously, then this is the baby ohm. And this is a really quick sketch I did just based on an image right from the movie. So there's not a lot of interpretation here. It's pretty straight up. You see, first of all, we're going to go ahead and set that center point, and that's where we're going to go ahead and mirror the image. So everything on the left, we're going to go ahead and pen tool out. And then when I build these, I like to start with the outline. Obviously, a strong silhouette really carries that shape. And I know some vector people would tell you, don't move every bezier handle as you go along. But I just find, especially when I'm starting out, that helps me kind of get the groove. Now, with each of these, I'll add bezier, handles or more points where there's sort of curve ins and some irregular shapes, and then just extend everything right to the line using Command or Control U so that you have anchor points tucked in there. And then you can see as we keep going, I've built another shape, and that's going to be the interior of the next shape. And again, pull that point right to the midpoint and keep going. And what you can do with this is you can either leave this shape as just a standalone shape, or you can use it as a cutout to create another shape. In this case, it's going to be its own standalone, and I kind of already figured that out as I was making things. And as I keep going, I'm adding little things like these little dots here will form kind of irregularities on that other shape. And so by putting them there, you're creating some interest, some visual interest. And you can see they're actually right next to like this little dagger that comes in on the bottom there. And then there's some little dents and bevels that happen on the top part of the shell that I'm going to go ahead and create those now while I'm at it. And I'm just kind of working from the largest shapes in and mentally kind of working from the back forward. So, we did the outline first, then we're going to do the second shape in kind of the order it would appear in layers, and Illustrator will just build that for you naturally. And then as we go, I'm making the decision to kind of not do these little organic shapes here underneath the omais. And the reason for that is because I'll get a much smoother shape if I build out a really smooth curve first, and then add those little indentations once I've gone a little bit further. And so again, I'm making another shape, following it the whole way along, kind of encapsulating each of those eyes, and then following it up to its kind of natural termination at the top point of the shell, right where the center line meets. And as I go through, I'm using the round edge tool to kind of pull in some of those edges and create some more organicness. All right, and then we can see I'm going to go ahead and start at the lower end of this piece of the shell. And here we've kind of got a break where there's not a solid line that falls the whole way up, where we want like our background color to show through. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create the rest of this shape as part of the original portion, where there might be a split. You could certainly make that argument that you could make a split here, but we're not going to. We're going to continue the whole way up. And then what we're going to do is that'll be one shape, and then we'll actually build the dark pieces between the omais as we keep going. And you can see that now. But that actually saves you, I feel like it saves you some time later, and allows more mutability in the design as you keep going. All right, and then we're, again, continuing up, creating this kind of, I like to think of it as like a foreground effect. You're looking for like a high contrast thing. So we've got the background is going to be the dark, and the foreground is going to be the light. And those two things will make up the majority of the shell. And everything else will fall onto that, either in shadow or in highlight, as the kind of the two contrasting colors that we'll pull in for the rest of the design. But we'll get into that later once we get into color selection and stuff. And because this is mirrored, we're going to have a light source coming from the right. What's going to end up happening here is everything we mirrored doesn't necessarily translate to the right side. Some of the things that we're going to mirror will only happen on the left side, and they won't occur on the right. I made the decision to make the contrast fall the whole way through, if only because it's easier that way, but also because that means you have like some elements that are mirrored and really nicely symmetrical, and others, like the light, that's going to go ahead and be directional depending on where it would kind of happen naturally. And then you could also say, oh, well, why wouldn't you just make the outline of the arms part of that back shape? But I decided in this case to make them part of their own shape, and there's a couple reasons for that, but primarily you could use that so you can animate with them at a later date. If they're separate objects, then they can be puppeted in After Effects or moved independently of the main parts of the Om body. And then we've got the lowermost Om shell. And then what we're doing here is we're making these circles, and these are going to be, again, little interest spots just to create some regularity where the Om shell would have its kind of natural bevels and things like a crab or horseshoe crab. You know, almost like you could say like there's some kind of sensory organ in there. We don't know. But there needs to be some added decoration on that, because the animation itself is really simple. If you guys have ever seen the image, it's really just two colors with some really basic cell shading. And so by adding these, we're doing a little bit more than, you know, simply copying the image right over. We're adding extra interest. You know, it's a design choice, and it's more than just, you know, what Miyazaki and his team decided when they made this. And then I'm using kind of the shape builder tool in this case. Arguably, it might be easier to simply use the Pathfinder tool, but I've found lately the shape builder tool is kind of superior in a couple ways, in that it's that non-destructive kind of, as long as you get the selection right to begin with, it's a non-destructive way to take two shapes and you don't kill either of them. Whereas if you're using the Pathfinder tool, you're kind of building shapes with the intention of getting rid of those shapes later. And I find that kind of bugs me. Just like you really carefully create these shapes and then you have to kill them later, and it just irks me to do that. Whereas, you know, the shape builder tool is like you get both shapes at the end. You don't lose anything, especially when you're doing subtractions and stuff or divisions. And right now what I'm doing is I'm just going ahead and creating these little divots underneath the Om's eye sockets, and those would be, if you can imagine, like a ridged ring, and those rings kind of tell us that portion of the Om shell comes up and kind of puckers as it meets the Om eye and creates almost like a plateau or a crater where the Om eye lives. And those little encapsulating divots will give that a look of like the shadow kind of creeps around and cups the bottom of that. It's not obviously 100% true to like how the light would work, because obviously there could be a lot more detail there. But again, it's a stylistic choice, and especially if you're referencing something like anime and animation, you shouldn't be throwing in that much detail to begin with, because it's really not true to, you know, the illustration style to begin with. And here's what I was talking about, one of those throwaway shapes, and sometimes they really work. Like in this case where you've got like just a nice curve or arc you want to mimic, I find that that's where you really want to start using them. And I'm not 100% with the shape builder tool yet. As you can see, I kind of go in, fail a couple of times, undo it, redo it, and then finally get to it once I figure out like, oh yeah, that's how it needs to get taken out. And again, using that rounded edge tool to round those edges and just get everything nice and organic looking. Zooming way in, getting rid of some points, smoothing some things out. Again, you can get rid of points on the fly as you're working on this if you find that you've made too many or things are looking awkward. Though with these, I always caution you is if you start not liking your outline, kind of look past that, because the outline itself, it's, I mean, half the battle. Like, you want to make a really clean outline, otherwise the design doesn't work at all. I mean, these shapes have to be, they have to sell the idea of what you're looking at without having to add color or texture. But they can't be the be all end all. And I find myself really hating the way something looks as I'm working on it. So I try to just push past this portion first and then get to the coloring portion. And that's where I really either start to fall in love with it or no, this isn't going to work. And just because of some of the decisions I've made. All right. And you can see here I'm pausing even to like figure out what's the best way to do this. And again, I'm creating a throwaway shape, you know, like I said, I hate it, but I really wanted to capture that first line I drew on those images. So I went ahead and just copied those lines over, those line segments. You know, you can use the direct select or just, or in the case where it's not a closed shape yet, you could just pull the line or segment right over with your regular selection tool. And then obviously, once these are all complete, you can go ahead and use the shape builder tool and select them all and then just start deleting away. Whereas with the Pathfinder tool, you have to individually go through each of those and hit them all with that same throwaway shape. And that's just kind of wasted time. So that's another way that the shape builder tool really can save you time here. Now I'm finally starting to work on the legs here. And what I was really focusing on is making sure I got that nice round in between each of the segments of the legs. And then you can see towards the top segment of each of the legs, there's this kind of bell-shaped curve here. And I really wanted to make sure that curve was almost like an end point in there, almost like a rigid piece that had this tiny little bit of curve. And there was a little bit of irregularity in here. It wasn't quite like a candy corn. It had like an indent. And I'm kind of hovering there for a minute. I think I was getting a drink or something. And then kind of cleaning up my lines. Okay, I got a good outline. And I think that's pretty decent. That's like what I want to capture for the rest of these. So now one thing you could do here, instead of tracing it like I am, you could go ahead and use the Pathfinder tool to kind of do half the work for you. Get half of the way there. And then just tuck things in as you want to. Though I've been trying to get away from that because I find the Pathfinder tool, or excuse me, the path option to offset path. That's what I'm thinking. Offset path tool. The offset path tool there really gives you that really cool, like it's the same width the whole way across. But the way it joins some of your angles and such can be kind of messy. You give you unintended line points, weird squared lines that you don't want, weird curves that you didn't want there. Unless it's a very basic shape, you tend to get that. And I usually don't like it on these smaller kind of fidgety things because then later what you're working with is kind of an imperfect shape that varies so much from what you had drawn anyways, with all the nice curve and line variations, that use a lot of the energy in the real illustration. And so that's one of the main concerns with digitizing any kind of visual medium, is that as soon as you take that thing off of paper, it loses, like, I want to say, like half the life. You really are hurt by taking that thing away from a sketch form. And that's because, you're taking the computer, and the computer is very perfect and lifelike. And unless you make purposeful steps to keep aspects of your illustration, like line width, like varying organic shapes, it will really easily devolve into kind of that basic, like really vectory looking thing. And even though I am working in vector, that's the reason to work in vector is so that you can use these for, in our case, and in my case especially, it's apparel, stickers, promotional design, posters, those kind of things, because it can be scaled infinitely. And then we're finally working on the upraised claw on the ohm here. And like I said, by doing it separately, by doing each of these claws in their own layer, which I think I extended their own layer eventually, what we're able to do is animate them later in After Effects. And the cool thing about After Effects is that, if you don't know, is that it can actually read Illustrator layers natively. So if you take your whole Illustrator file, shove it in After Effects, it'll say, oh, you want me to treat all these layers as separate compositions? And it'll do so. So that you can literally take each of these little things you've built, each of these unique pieces, and they'll already be on their own layer. And anyone who does animation knows that you need those articulating joints in order to make the thing move. Now you could even go further and say, let's go ahead and make each segment its own thing. But I really think the puppet tool in this case would get you where you need to go, and you don't need to do that kind of work. And I don't really know if this is going to be something I do in After Effects anyway, so it's kind of putting the cart before the horse. It's just good building, And then as I keep going, I'm finding other, little things that I need to clean up and before I make the mirror over. Because the toughest thing once you've done the mirror tool is like having to undo it or go back and try to apply something to both sides. It doesn't ever really work. And you can see here I'm taking out an extra point just to go ahead and make that a little bit smoother. Grouping all of these legs. And then just kind of checking and seeing what my shapes look like. Because as you're going through here, you want to make sure that, your shapes make sense. And I realized I couldn't mirror the thing yet because I still need to go ahead and do this. Now here's an example of me making a throwaway shape to use to make the oh my. What I'm trying to do is just get that perfect curve, and I actually use a Pathfinder. I don't use a Pathfinder. I could have there really easily, but I use the shape builder tool. And again, creating some throwaway shapes. They'll actually get added to the whole shape of the oh my here and create these little, again, that look of almost an encapsulating like canyon or mesa there at the cusp of that piece of the shell. So it creates some organic rigidness there. And you'll see here, I start to, again, build this using circles, using ellipses, joining these together. But the problem you run into when you're using like the shape tool of Pathfinders, when you're using circles, is that everything is fine when you're on a 90 degree or a 180 degree or 0 degree or whatever. But as soon as you go ahead and throw it at an angle, the points aren't going to be where you want when you want to do the things like, the round corner tool. So you have to really intentionally think that out. So I decided from here on out, I'm just going to draw these things and not really worry too crazily about where they land, as long as they're kind of on that cusp of where that darker background image was going to be. So in that shape that forms the ground instead of the four, that's where I'm placing those, just so they land either before it or right on it. And I kind of tweak those as we get further into the coloring portion. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and pop these out pretty quick. And again, this is one of those times when you might benefit from making all of these ellipses exactly the same and just copy and slamming them over to each other. But I just don't think that in this case I wanted to hurt the original sketch illustration like that, because there was some variance in each side and they all were at somewhat of a different angle. So I'm kind of reviewing the whole thing, doing the last of the main pieces, kind of the easy stuff, before I get to some of the lighting aspects. So I've already figured out the lighting that's going to be on the left side. And so I'm going to start that, kind of go through here and make those decisions. Again, using the ellipse tool. You can see in this case I use the Pathfinder tool instead, creating some highlights. And these don't have to be realistic, but what they do is they give the viewer the idea is that the light's coming from above and to the right, possibly. And then that way you have created the illusion, in this case, that the thing exists in the real world, that there's a lighting source in there, and that each of these eyes is going to have a reflection, it's going to have a specular highlight, and it's going to also have a dark shadowy area. You could even go further, I would say, in these eyes, is that if you were to do some effects where there maybe was an inner glow or some kind of shape that's at an opacity or transparency in the eye, that could be kind of interesting too, to make them look like they have something dark in the center, like a real eye might, or some kind of organic goings on beneath there. And then again, these are easy enough shapes that you could use the brush tool, or just go through here and use an ellipse and then kind of stretch it out. But I prefer just, since they're so simple and since I'm really used to making them, is just drawing them out. you're really just, it's 4 points. It's the same as a square. It doesn't take you that long to really figure that out. And only once in a while do you have to like tweak it to really get a nice round on each side. And you want that curve to bend at the same angle, obviously, as the eye bend. And then we're going to go ahead and extend out those perfect ellipses for the topmost specular highlight to look like, ellipses, not a round. I'm probably taking a break here, grabbing another water or something, and then going in, and it looks like there's a few things left to do. A few more of those little pit areas in the shell where it naturally dips down, and then going through and creating these more divots along the whole surface. And there's quite a bit of these, and it's important that you have these because they add quite a bit of detail to what otherwise might be considered kind of a simplistic drawing. It's like we were saying before, like, how are you going to sell that image of it being organic, and that you didn't just copy some animation off of online, which, essentially you could claim if there wasn't any additional line work or design decisions made on your own part. And I'd like to, for anyone watching this and wondering how they can actually use this for original IPs, their own work, which is where I prefer to work in. I'm not usually a fan art guy. I'm not a huge fan of that, but it is kind of a great way to get likes online, get notices. You take an existing fandom and piggyback on that. But what I really like to do here is take these lessons, like, okay, if you're going to create your own monster or your own illustration or anything, is make sure that you're building things to look organic if it's supposed to be organic, look straight if it's supposed to be non-organic, and that you're making purposeful decisions during your sketch phase that will later translate into aesthetic looking shapes at a later point. And if not aesthetic looking shapes that help sell the design. Now you can see right here, I'm actually building a shape to carve out an area of lightness here. So like as if the light source, we've got a shadow on the larger object, and the light source would hit those little bumps on the shell there. And the same thing here. These organic little shapes are going to be parts that will be hit by the light source, and the shell is going to go ahead and reflect those in a lighter sheen. And you can see that definitely in the coloring phase, which will be the next episode here. Going through, adding more shadows. And these will be areas of multiply. They won't be 100% like the ground color. They won't be the dark blue, green. Eventually the rest of the elm takes on. It's going to be like a, probably a multiply at 20% black. And that way it's still giving us a nice dark shadow, but it's retaining the original color that's inherent in the shell itself. And this is kind of a unique thing. I like doing these, building these kind of almost, you could call these like perfect ring shapes, They tend to look really good once you get them right. And in this case, lucky enough to get fit them in just a couple little tweaks of the offset path tool, using the shape builder tool as the throwaway shape there, and just start minusing out what I don't want. And this is about 4 times sped up, so you can imagine it took me a couple minutes to get all this going, deleting what I don't want, and then just doing a delete of all the line segments that I need to throw away. And then using our round tool there, there's a couple extra shapes hanging out, and that tends to happen with the Pathfinder or the shape builder tool. It tends to just leave lines maybe where it doesn't intend to. So it's important to just make adjustments for that. And it looks like a segment got left behind, so we're going to go ahead and complete that with the pen tool. Make a nice little round there. That's an easy way. If you've got a shape that's mostly square or something like that, and you want to make it feel a little bit more alive, using that kind of methodology that the original animation teams use, like squash and stretch, is just create, a bevel, or, create a round at the bottom. And this is a much more interesting shape already. Little crescent guy here for another shadow underneath the oh my. I think we're almost here, just checking for the last couple these indentations, doing another shadow here. And maybe I decided against it because I'll have to do the shadow separately anyways. And then I'm just checking that the lines connect here to the center point before I do the mirror. So the thing here to do is mirror, and then copy that mirror over to the right side. And then just make sure that your origin point for your mirror is at one of the anchor points that hits that center fault line, because otherwise you're going to have an offset mirror. When you go to join shapes, you're going to have some really funky points and stuff hanging out. Taking another break, it looks like. All right, and then finally selecting all the shapes that I made on the left side, moving over to the right, doing a mirror. All right, perfect. And then just checking my work with the background sketch off. If it reads without the background sketch, you know you're onto something. And that's a pitfall you can run into sometimes, is doing a really tight background sketch and then trying to do this line work, doing ton of line work, and it never gets there. So it's important that you check as you go through that it does read. So I'm going to leave us at this. Here's the line work done over the original sketch. You can see there's some objects that still need to be done, but they're going to be handled later. We're going to move on to color next, and that will be in our next episode, which should be out sometime in the next couple of days. All right, so thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, press like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and be sure to head over to mikeharrisdesign.net for my portfolio, the latest work I'm up to, and a tutorial blog that I will be putting up in the next few days. So thanks again, and have a great week.